And she said that, and had said to the person next to me, shoot, I forgot to go to the bathroom before I have to get up. And I was totally off kilter. So introductions like that are pretty nerve-wracking, but I appreciate it. And I'm enormously thankful to the U.S. Embassy, the American Center, for hosting my trip here and making all of this possible. It is such an exciting time to be here, and I'm thankful for you all for showing up. I want to talk about where we are with social media and social change, provide a framework for thinking about this process of using social media, and then give you examples of NGOs using social media in certain kinds of ways. And then we'll have plenty of time for questions and conversation. How does that sound as a plan? Good? Good nodding. Thank you. I appreciate it. So here we go. Felicity is clicking. We're going to assume everything is going to go well over there. You know, put it right on the table. That would be easy. And now you've got to go way back. Felicity is no longer clicking. She's lost a career track here. We're good. Okay, let's start. I want you to imagine Washington, D.C., January 12th, 2010. Very cold night. And Wendy Harmon is at home in Northern Virginia, and she's had dinner, and she's doing her last check of her social media channels before heading to bed. She's checked her blogs and Facebook and Twitter. All of a sudden, she starts to see a series of very strange messages on the Twitter account that she manages. And it says, @Red Cross. See, Wendy Harmon is head of social media for the Red Cross. @Red Cross, help, and then an address. And then another tweet, @Red Cross, help, and then another address. So she put the addresses into Google Maps, and she found that these tweets were coming from Haiti. And it turns out that Wendy Harmon was one of the first people outside of Haiti to learn about the earthquake on January 12th. And there were people literally buried beneath the rubble who were throwing a message in a bottle via Twitter to the Red Cross. That was the only thing they could think to do. And she took those messages, she sent them to the State Department, she sent them to relief groups on the ground who weren't connected to the Red Cross. In some cases they were able to help, in other cases, sadly, they weren't. But what we know for sure was that the Red Cross, as an institution, was instantly and intricately connected to the people on the ground and working through a network of other agencies providing immediate help. Back up 5 years to Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. Hurricane Katrina was an immense disaster on so many levels, certainly on a human level. Local, state, federal government were disastrous in their responses, but so was the Red Cross. They were not able to match the requests on the ground for assistance. They didn't know where to go. They were unable and unwilling to partner with other agencies. Their response was a complete disaster. As a result, their reputation and their fundraising were completely in tatters. One response from the organization was to hire Wendy Harmon, was to say, we can no longer pretend that the conversations out there online don't matter to us. We have got to engage in the world. So what the Red Cross did was they began a journey that they're still continuing on of moving from what I would call a fortress organization. Most traditional nonprofit or NGO organizations look and act like this. Now, they aren't intending to do that, but somewhere along the line, the notion that they are standalone organizations working in spite of or despite other organizations, high walls that keep insiders in and outsiders certainly out. Remember why fortresses were made. It's to protect themselves from threats on the outside. By doing this, they become cut off from the world like the Red Cross was in Katrina. This was doable in a world that was analog, It wasn't ever great. I don't think this was ever a great way to function, but I understood it because they could raise money through direct mail, through individual giving, they could sustain themselves, they could pretend that they were doing the best work that they could. But the world has changed significantly in the last 5 or 6 years. This no longer works. Even for the organizations that continue to work this way, I was speaking to somebody this morning from the Jewish Agency. Anybody from the Jewish Agency? It's very tough, right? Even if they continue to look and act this way, the world isn't this anymore. What they need to do is they need to switch to a new model. This is a new pay grade. Sure. People assume when we talk about taking the walls down in the fortresses that we might be talking about a structure that looks like a glass castle. And the problem is a glass castle still has a wall. There's still something separating me on the outside from you on the inside. This is a very different entity. When Beth Cantor and I were doing the research for the network nonprofit, what we found was that there's an array of newer organizations born this century, and we call them network nonprofits, who have social media in their DNA, who work and act a certain way. But the more exciting news is that there are a large number, a growing number, of traditional organizations like the Red Cross that are in the process of becoming network nonprofits. And what these organizations end up looking like are more like social networks than traditional standalone fortresses. And they end up acting more like natural sponges than organizations. Natural sponges are amazing organisms, anchored to the ocean floor, so they're very strong and resilient, very simple. Think about your organizations. Can you really tell your story in 15, 30 seconds? I had 3 hours with a group the other day, still couldn't tell their story, right? I don't think there was enough time in the day for them to tell their story. They take in 20,000 times their weight in water every day. They're porous. Water comes pouring through. And here's the best part about a sponge. I hope you'll remember this part. They keep the good stuff and let go of the bad. Think about your organizations. Do you keep the good stuff or the bad stuff? Which one are you letting go? Right? Imagine a world where you are letting the bad stuff go. Letting the thought that other people out there are competitors, just letting it go. Can you imagine it? Maybe not now. Maybe in 45 minutes. I'll come back and I'll ask you again. So let's go. What we have to do to understand how to get from fortresses to sponges is we need to understand networks. This is the first step. So in that old world, in the fortress world, it was one standalone entity. And then down the road there was another standalone entity, not really connected to one another, or so they thought. And another one and another. We live and work and play in social networks. It is just part of what makes us human. So what networks are made of, who had Tinker Toys as a kid? Anybody have Tinker Toys? Right? We always lost the round parts. I was just hitting my brother in the head with the sticks. Right? Well, they're all plastic now. It's no fun at all. So this is actually a picture of a social network. The round part with the holes in it, that's a node. Nodes are organizations or individuals. They are connected by, in the case we're going to talk about social media, to other nodes. Who's had a toddler? Anybody have a toddler or seen a toddler, right? Remember when they're 2, 3, 4, they parallel play, right? And you watch them, they're standing right next to each other doing their own thing. If you had 2 nodes that didn't have a connection, they would be parallel playing, right? The connections are what creates a relationship between us. Some of the nodes in networks are larger than others, which means that they're more influential than others because they have a lot of connections. And you know some people like this. Beth Cantor, my friend, is somebody like this. She is a blogger who has an enormous network. If you can talk to Beth and have her say something on your behalf, you're going to reach a whole lot of people. So thinking about an organization as part of a network changes your orientation to the world. You're no longer the sun with everybody revolving around you, which can be quite an ego hit for some people, I understand that. You are part of this network, one part. And all of these other nodes are potential resources for you. One of the huge drawbacks to working in a fortress is that everything is scarce. You never have enough time or money or people. When I ran a nonprofit organization, I can tell you in reflection now, there wasn't a single meeting that we had that fundamentally, under the words on the agenda, wasn't about the fact that we didn't have enough time, money, or people. Everything was scarce. And when you feel like you don't have enough of those things, you gather things in and you don't let them go. When you understand that you're actually part of a network, that network consists of other organizations and people who are smart, who are of goodwill, who actually want to help you, the polarity changes. Instead of pulling in, you can breathe out. But it only works if you're simple, see? Because you can only do the key parts you can do, and then you have to let the other pieces go into the network. A very different way of working. Now, we've always had networks, but now we have social media to power them, right? This is the gasoline for the engine, or the electricity, or the wind, or whatever you want to do. We'll be correct about it, right? Social media tools. So, you're all using the tools, right? We saw you're on Facebook, a bunch of people are on Twitter, using email, correct? Everybody gets way too much email. In my next life, I'm going to teach a class on how never ever to press reply all. Please don't press reply all. And reply all with a, like, thanks, right? That just stuffs up your inbox, right? Email. So, what all of those tools, Facebook, Twitter, blogs, email, which is still very big, YouTube, what they are they're all part of the social media toolkit, and they all have the same DNA, right? They all are easy to use. Even if some folks are struggling with some of the tools, remember the fact that they're ubiquitous. That you have 500 million people on Facebook is because it's easy to use. If it was hard to use, my mom wouldn't be on it, right? This is the woman who carries her cell phone on and won't turn it on because she's afraid of using the battery, right? But she's on Facebook, right? So they're easy to use, very inexpensive. They not just allow, but require a two-way conversation. We're no longer in the broadcast age. We are no longer agencies pushing out message, 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 right? That's what fortresses did. Social media says, this is a conversation. We're going to go two ways. And remember, young people, digital natives who grew up pinging, poking, friending, commenting, all of those things, they think that you, as an agency, an NGO, understand that it's a two-way street. So they think that they can email you or respond on, send you a message on Facebook, and they're waiting for the reply. If you're not replying, they're going away. Right? We have to understand the biggest threat to NGOs right now, I think, is not a digital divide. It's not a funding problem. It's a generational divide. That NGOs are run by people who are of a different generation than this ginormous generation of 15 to 30-year-olds who think and act fundamentally differently. The final thing I want to tell you about social media for social change, because remember, our context here is not selling soda. Our context is social change, is the fact that social media makes scale possible. Let me explain that. This is very important. Old broadcast world. You were trying to get eyeballs on your stuff, whether it was your annual report or an ad or, on TV or radio. The only way to get more eyeballs in that framework was to buy more time. It cost you more money per eyeballs. Social media, you could put up a YouTube video that 5 people watch, or 5 million people watch. It didn't cost you any more. What happens, and don't let anybody use the phrase viral video with you. If anybody says to you, I'm going to make a viral video, You have my permission to laugh at them and walk away. You can't make anything go viral. You can hope it goes viral. You can do some things to try to make it go viral. You cannot create a viral video. But what happens when it goes viral is that friends of friends are telling people about it, generally through email. When friends of friends are doing that, when that second and third and fourth degrees of separation kicks in, that's how something goes viral. And it costs you no more energy than if 5 people saw it. That's like a catalyst in chemistry. You started something that then had a life of its own and didn't cost you anything. That's scale for social change. We have the possibility of scale at a very low cost. But organizations have to work a certain way, work like those sponges, to make it happen, because you can't work like a fortress and throw up your social media channels and say, we've done it, we got it. Now let me caution you about something. Because somebody here, and you don't have to tell me who it is, I'll trust you on this, somebody here wants to ask the question, what social media tool should I use for my agency? Right? We want to do X, tell me what the tool is. And the answer is, I can't tell you. Not because it's a secret, which I would be happy to keep, right? I can't tell you because it's going to be unique to your circumstances, your community, your conversation that you want to have. And the only way to find out is to experiment. But the good news is, it's very inexpensive to experiment. So don't get stuck on trying to figure out the right tool before you step into the social media waters. It's not possible. Okay? This is... Whoop, whoop, back one more. Whoop, forward one more. Okay. At its most fundamental level, all social change always has been about conversation. What do we pay attention to? We pay attention to the issues that your mother, your spouse, your child, your girlfriend is telling you to focus on. There are just too many things in our attention. That's what we care about. In order to make behavior change, in order to make policy change happen, it happens through conversation. Social media are vehicles for conversation. What you need to think about for your agency, because you're in the social change business, is what conversations do we need to have in order to make change happen? Think about the conversations, don't think about the tools. Okay? We're going to take a little pause, because that was a lot of information. Tree's given up. He's quitting on the clicking. So hard to get good help, isn't it? Anybody have any questions about the first segment? Where are we going?
Not about the first segment, but can we turn down the air conditioning?
Oh,
Down?
can we turn? Which way does down mean? Colder or hotter? You want it hotter in here?
No.
No.
No, really no.
No. Those of us sliding into a next stage of life say no.
If you want to move, then it's warmer back here.
It's warmer back there. Sorry. Okay. You're going to suffer? So Josh. I don't want you to be uncomfortable though. Yesterday we had, over 70 students at Hebrew University in a smallish room, and it was so hot, and I was working hard, and I told Felicity, I think I have just slipped into a whole nother stage of life right here in front of everybody. Okay, no more menopause jokes. So look, anybody have a question on the content we just chatted about? Okay. Yeah.
Perhaps you will refer to it later, but when you say it's very easy, it doesn't cost more money.
I didn't say it's easy, I said the tools are easy.
The tools are easy, and that it doesn't cost more money to get to 5 million than 5, I mean, so I guess it does take some more actions, and I think it's about our time that we need to do things. So I would like you to refer to that perhaps later, like how to arrange your time and your tasks to get to these things.
I don't know if I'll actually get to workflow because we have a lot of content, but your point is very, very valid, and I hope I didn't misstate that. Using social media for organizations is not free, even if some of the tools are free, because it does cost time. It's funny because the Jewish agency person this morning was bringing up the fact that they had a person on staff who added to her job social media just she just wanted to do that part, and the agency was so thrilled because they felt it was free, even though it wasn't. It was her time to do this. It takes a lot of time to create and manage and caretake those conversations that need to happen with social media, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Okay? You're good? All right. Okay. Yeah.
Will you talk about whether doing it in-house or hiring somebody externally? Because I know that's a conversation that happens within a lot of NGOs, whether to put somebody permanently on that within the organisation or to...
So the question is whether to put somebody permanently on the organization on social media or to outsource. Yeah. So the quick answer to that, because it's a very important question, is I'm fine with hiring an outsider to design something in a time-limited way. So to design a website or to put up a blog for an agency if they need that kind of technical help. I'm not in favor of outsourcing the conversation because the conversation is such a fundamental part of the agency, right? I don't want, and this is a problem when agencies bring in the summer intern and send them down the hall and say, do social media, and that kid goes and does something, and then that kid goes back to school and nobody has any idea what that was. That's a bad thing. We are really talking about a fundamental capacity for organizations, okay?
What happened? Who's clicking?
Anybody clicking?
I think it might be easier on the table here.
No, that's not where we want to be.
I'm like the only one working hard here.
1 billion.
זה לא נכון. I know just enough people to get into a whole lot of trouble. I can ask questions, but I don't understand the answers to them. So I just walk around and ask questions. Unless it gets like, oh, stop there.
Yeah, that's what
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to push forward. You get
Okay, yes, I'll take
This is like the worst job in the room, apparently. I could just do it if it's that bad. All right. Back to the action. Ready? So, here is the fundamental framework that we found from our research. Whether an organization was born as a network nonprofit, like Charity Water, which we'll look at in a second, or whether it's in the process of becoming that way, like Red Cross, like the Humane Society, they all had the same framework that they were using, unintentionally. This is just what happens. This is not in Hebrew, so English, we're going left to right. They have a way of being that turns into a way of doing. Those fortresses, when I was saying a minute ago, the organizations that run out and put up a Facebook page and then look at it and say it's not working, that's because they didn't focus first on a way of being. Right? They're just trying to use the tools like you would pick up a telephone and use it. Social media only works well when you have these kinds of elements. You don't have to be at a 10 on all of them, but when you understand these elements and are ready to address them as an organization, it requires organizational leadership. I was talking to somebody yesterday who was a junior level staff person in an agency who wants to do this. And I told her the first thing she needs to do, she could do an experiment or two to show senior staff. It's giving her a little bit of leeway. But in the long run, she's going to need senior staff support for this. Because we're talking about fundamental culture shift in organizations. And you know from your own life, in trying to change any way that you behave, and then mush up a whole bunch of people in organizational life, try to change the way an organization works, nothing is harder than culture change. Nothing is harder than trying to relearn the ways that we learn. Because look at this list on the left. If you were in graduate school in nonprofit management, like I was, if you ran an agency like I did, for 12 years, nothing on this list were things that you were taught. You weren't taught to think about being part of a network. You certainly weren't taught to listen. Listening is not something, I think we're even taught in life. I'm the mother of 3 boys. Trust me, listening is not big, right? we're not taught to open ourselves up to be really transparent to the world, right? We're taught to close down and hide. We're certainly not taught to give more credit than we take. Somebody yesterday told me a great phrase. On Twitter in particular is the kind of place, Facebook is similar, where the people who are very successful using those tools, who have big networks, who are influencers, when you examine the content of their messages, they give more information about other people, now link to other sites, celebrate other people, other organizations, 3 times more than they talk about themselves. 3 times. Think about that. Right? We're not taught to do that anywhere. We would think that that's disastrous in organizational life before. But if you don't do that, the phrase this person told me yesterday, which I thought was great, was when you become a me-former, not an informer, a me-former, all about me, nobody listens. Right? Nobody wants to pay attention to somebody marketing themselves all the time. It's uninteresting, it's untrustworthy, it's inauthentic, and social media tools will not, and channels, and networks will not respond to inauthenticity. You can feel it. When I go on Twitter and I see logos, and I understand people want to have organizational accounts, I get that, but I can tell you from my experience, when I see the logo and I see a message, I turn off. Because I know in life that logos don't actually talk. People talk. And these are tools for people to talk to one another. For people to talk to lots of one another's. That's why it's scalable. But essentially, fundamentally, at its core, it's a person-to-person channel. So we need to focus on this left side in order to do the fun things on the right side. Right? Once you have this way of being, once you're really starting to think about being social and taking the walls down and connecting in that network, then you can connect with enough people, a crowd, to help you. Right? Otherwise, you're going to ask for help out there and nobody's going to respond because you haven't built any relationships with people. They don't trust you. They're not interested in you. Right? You can turn your friends on Facebook into funders, but only if you've built the relationships first. You can get help with governance from a network, but again, only if you're being a certain way. Now you're up. That's right. Outstanding. You're the best clicker in the room. This is what this is going to feel like, this shift, to many people. Free fall. This is frightening. I understand it's frightening. It makes sense that it's frightening. I am asking people to literally unlearn everything they've learned about organizational life. Really hard. And what will happen is they'll start to talk about a litany of fears that they have. Hopefully they will talk about it. The worst part in organizational life is when people feel frightened or scared, they just shut down and just say no. And there isn't a conversation. I hope there's a conversation in organizations, because there should be. Because these fears are real and they're deep. But I hope these are conversation starters, not conversation stoppers. Too often in organizational life, think about a meeting you've been in, and around the table, and there's somebody who's very, very adept. They've actually created a career of finding all the reasons why you can't do something. You know that person, right? And they'll go through the whole reason. We can't do it because we've opened ourselves up to liability issues, we've opened ourselves up to criticism, we're going to lose control of the content, we're going to lose money, the board isn't going to be happy. Go on and on. It's really quite a skill. It's too bad it's such an unconstructive skill. What happens in organization, and I think of this as kind of a lawyer-like skill. Any lawyers in the room? Okay. All right. I think it's okay. Okay, good. I think it's lawyer-ish. Is to find all the reasons you can't do something and stop. And we can't stop. Now look, here's the reality. Organizations have 2 main fears about social media. One is losing control of the message. All right, particularly since we have spent so much time on branding, and we have communication staff whose whole beings are wrapped up in message control and those talking points. So one is losing control of the message, and the other is opening yourself to criticism. Criticism that will feel hurtful, criticism that will make you look bad in the eyes of boards and funders and the public. Here's the reality. You ready for the cold dose of water here? The reality is both of those things have already happened. So if your organization is hesitating about using social media because of those two fears, you are spending an enormous amount of energy worrying about something that had already happened in the world that you can't do anything about. You've already lost control of the message because anything that you're sending out there, somebody else is reshaping and mashing up and sharing in their own words. There is nothing you can do about that. Think about the music industry. There is nothing they can do about piracy. Do you know, even to this day, with all of the money that the music industry has put into suing individuals and trying to rein in all that property, how much of the songs do you think are still downloaded illegally? What do you think the percentage is now today after all that energy they've spent?
99%?
Yeah, it's like 85% or something. I mean, it is a crazy percentage of wasted time and energy, except maybe for the lawyers who got paid to do it. They were the only ones who benefited from that. So, you've lost control of the message. Criticism, those conversations, remember the Red Cross at Katrina? There was a lot of criticism of the Red Cross online. They were pretending that it didn't exist because they weren't listening. Right? You can pretend that nobody's talking about your issue or your agency, or you can engage in the conversation. Which one do you think is going to be more constructive over the long run? You cannot pretend that it's not there. But, and here's the important part, somewhere along the line in organizational life, we mushed together criticism, legitimate criticism, with just flame throwing, with just craziness, right? There are wingnuts out there. I got that, right? You need to ignore them. You can ban them from your conversation, right? You can have specific rules around your conversation. Legitimate criticism has a very important role to play in organizational life. Those critics have a point to make. They probably represent other people who feel the same way, who haven't had the courage or the opportunity to share it with you. Engaging in a conversation with the critics does several things. One, it makes that person feel listened to, which is awfully important. They care enough about your agency to want to be heard. Two, it gives voice to other people who are thinking about it. Three, gives you the opportunity to correct or educate around that issue, or to change based on it. Four, it allows other people in the network, remember all those nodes in the network, to come to your defense as well. That's a lot of reasons to engage with critics. 5, I'm so happy with myself for all this counting. 5, oh, and just being a smarty pants, I just lost it. Right? That's what my mother would say, you had to be a smarty pants. I can't remember, what was it? All right, we're going to have to push on. I'm going to have to come back to that. The way to start, once you push past the fears, the way to start organizationally is to have social media policies. Anybody have policies here? Okay, this is a good place to start. The good news is there are lots of policies out there that you can look at and make your own. I helped the Avichai Foundation last year develop a set of social media policies. They're on my blog. Very simple, 1 page. Some people have like 30-page long social media policies. I think that makes it way too hard to try to figure out, how to get in. The point of the policies are to provide comfort to senior staff and board that there are some rules to what we're doing. It's not just the Wild West. It also provides guidance to staff and volunteers about what they're allowed to do. All of the policies boil down to this tweet from this organization, which is basically use your common sense. The struggle for organizations is they're not accustomed to relying on staff to use their common sense. That's why we have bureaucracies. The purpose of bureaucracy is to cover everybody's ass, right? I can't make that decision, sign off, I send it to the guy ahead of me, above me. He signs off, send it to the guy above me. And all the time we're watering down whatever it is. We are not accustomed to saying to whoever it is, the person answering the phones, the person running programs, the person doing advocacy, you are smart, you know what we're doing, go and have a conversation about it. That level of mistrust, always astounds me because organizations spend so much time and money hiring people and then they don't trust them, right? I know organizations that have to have the CEO, the head honcho, approve Twitter messages before they go out. Approve 140 characters. You don't trust anyone else to say that for your organization? That would be like following those staff people to a cocktail party and listening to the conversation they were having with people about your work. Everybody is talking about what you do, inside and outside. Your job from an organizational standpoint is to arm them with good information, to support them, to correct them if need be, just like you would correct somebody who might be rude on the phone, and to let them go. Really hard. I understand that. I wonder what that point was I was going to make before. Actually, can you go back one? That was purposeful. That was a lot of stuff on the culture change. We're going to get this whole cooking thing down. Anybody have any questions about that piece so far? Anybody? Doing okay? Yeah.
I just wanted to say that the bureaucracy thing, you cannot have it on social media because then you miss
You're not going to go fast enough, right? You have to be agile.
So if you wait for the process of approval to reply someone and the river flow.
Now I do want to be clear. There is the agility needed for social media. It doesn't mean that the efforts of an organization are unplanned, right? So you want to leave yourself room as an organization to do things, to do two things. You want to have a very intentional outreach on the channels. Remember when I said earlier on what's the conversation you want to have? That needs to be planful, right? What are we trying to do this year? What would that conversation look like? That needs to all happen. At the same time, you need to leave yourself with the agility to respond to real events in real time and show your network that you matter, that you're relevant to them. Yeah?
You've got one Facebook page for your organization and you have different people responding. So your organization is suddenly sounding like different people maybe talk to each other. So then you've got one organization. How does that sound?
So the question is, you've got one Facebook page and then you've got individuals in the organization doing their own thing. To me, I think it sounds human. That doesn't mean that the individuals aren't prepared with information. So for instance, the Humane Society has a daily morning 9-minute meeting. I love that. 9 minutes. That's it. They all stand up. End of 9 minutes, they're done. And they talk about what are the issues they want to talk about that day, particularly for the advocacy staff. And any talking points that they want to have. So they're all trying to talk about the same things. The fact that they're using different language, or they might have a different slant on it, I think it makes them very human because remember, everybody has their own network. You okay? We are not robots. We have lives, right? We all have our own network of friends and family and professional colleagues. And what you want to do when you're looking at the world in abundant ways is you want to be able to tap those networks. So you can't have all of those people sounding exactly alike because it won't be authentic in their own networks. If somebody goes really off the reservation, says something that is opposed to the organizational policy while wearing their organizational hat, which is very important to remember, it needs to be corrected. I have seen those instances happen. I have seen the corrections happen. And the organizations did just fine. We have this fear in our minds that the sky is going to fall if somebody makes a mistake. Now that's different from you do need employees to be very clear on whatever channels they're on about when they're speaking in a professional voice, when they're in their private lives. And there is nothing you can do about what they speak about in their private lives, even if it's on public channels. Okay, don't spend energy on it. It's bad use of energy. I'll give you an example, though, of an organization that risked the sky falling. A couple of years ago, Dr. Len, who's the Assistant Medical Director of the American Cancer Society, went to the board and asked if he could start a blog. And the board said, absolutely. But, by the way, no comments allowed on the blog. And he said, then it's not a blog. Then it's just a billboard. Right? Because the whole point of a blog are the comments, which is where the conversation happens. And they said, yes, but what happens if somebody criticizes us? And he said, I don't know. Can you give me 3 months to try it, and we'll see. And he's a very natural blogger, very conversational. He's terrific, and had a lot of traffic right away. At the end of the 2nd month, somebody came into the comments of a post he wrote and said they were very upset about the overhead rate of American cancer. This is an issue that the organization is extremely sensitive about. So Dr. Len went into the comments and responded right away. I understand your concern. Here's how we calculate our overhead rate. Here's why it is what it is. Now, because he had spent 2 months talking on this blog and building relationships with people, other people came onto the channel, came onto those comments, and said, I'm also a supporter of American cancer, and I'm okay with the overhead rate. I don't love it, but I'm okay with it. It was a very natural conversation. At the end of that conversation, the original commenter came back on and said, I get it now. If the board had just seen the comment, the critical comment, they would have never allowed the blog. But when you saw the entire interaction, the good news was the sky didn't actually fall for American cancer. You can have people with different voices on and speaking, and it will not do harm to an organization. Yeah.
I totally agree with you, but especially for political organizations, if you have a blog, even if it's a private blog, you don't anymore represent yourself. You represent an organization, so you have to be careful about what you say. I mean, you don't have to stop the conversation going, but you have to be careful with the wording. I know that from personal experience.
So the issue here is about an organization having a political blog, a person in an organization having a political blog that would be at odds with the organization's viewpoints? No, I'm missing it.
Not a political blog, but even if he has even a personal blog.
And works for a political organization. Yeah. Right. So that's where the policies really come in, right? Because you're right, I'm being too blanket about that. There are instances, I know a foundation, for instance, that has very specific policies about Israel, and they feel it would be very harmful to them if people in their private lives were expressing very different opinions, and they've had to hash that out in their social media policies about what's acceptable and what's not. I personally don't think it's a great use of energy for organizations to run after people looking at what they're talking about in their private lives, but I do understand there are some circumstances where that's necessary. Yeah.
And a lot of times people worry about the crossover between their personal page on Facebook and then obviously the organization, because at the end of the day everyone begins to find out, oh, you're you here and you're you there and you're you somewhere else.
Right.
I kind of feel like it isn't necessarily so terrible. It all begins to come together as long as you're careful, as you say, you think a minute before you hit the the update, but I'm just curious for you to.
So I'm delighted that you brought it up. So the issue is around where's the line between public and personal. And this is a huge issue that I hear about all the time. And I raised it yesterday with a group of foundations. We were at Beit Avichai. And what was very interesting was an Israeli woman came up afterwards and said to me, it's different here. We all know one another. We know who had a baby. We all went to the bris. It's not like it is in the States where people are very closed about their personal lives. That was very interesting to me, the contextual piece of it. This is a struggle for a lot of people, particularly people who are older, frankly, and aren't used to having as public lives. Younger people are much more comfortable living life in public. There is no fast rule about where the line is between public and private. We're all going to have to use our own level of comfort about where that is. It might surprise you to know, even though, for instance, I'm on all the channels, I do not talk about my kids. I don't post pictures about my kids. That's just a place that makes me personally uncomfortable. Not that it's wrong in any way. So everybody's going to have to practice and experiment about what makes them comfortable. The point I do want to make to you, though, and this is very important, is again to remember that logos don't talk. So if you're not revealing of yourself on social media, you're going to have trouble connecting with other people there. Okay. Yeah.
Would you suggest instead of a logo then? I mean, if I'm logging for my organization, I mean, should I put the organizational logo with my name on it, or how does this work?
So there are a bunch of choices. The idea of having the logo up and then clearly identifying yourself as a person who's talking on this channel is great, or if it's multiple people, that's fine. I personally don't think there's a need for the organizational account unless you need multiple people to staff it, which might be a personal drain. There are organizations like, for instance, the Sunlight Foundation. That's just the 20 people in the organization all have their accounts on Twitter, all identify themselves. I'm the CEO of Sunlight. I'm expressing my professional opinions here, and that just works for them. So there are iterations of it. I just really want to emphasize to you the need for the humanness to come across in the conversation. Let me push ahead. I have some examples of ways that groups are using social media. Good clicking. So, so much better than Sheree. One of the key aspects, remember from that chart about being before doing, is listening. This is a very interesting story. About 2 years ago, do you know who Michael Vick is? He's a quarterback in the NFL. He was in jail for organizing a dogfighting ring, a really terrible crime. When he was coming to the end of his jail sentence in the spring of 2009, the president of the American Humane Society, Wayne Purcell, wrote on his blog. His blog is on the organization's website, and he's a very avid blogger, had built quite a community there. He wrote on his blog that he was going to go see Michael Vick in jail to look him in the eye and see if he could feel that Michael Vick could make a good spokesman for the organization. Now you can imagine that his community on his blog, many people were outraged by this. This thing exploded. He knew it would. He didn't pretend that this was going to be greeted with open arms. He purposefully put that message on his blog so that he could engage in a process of listening to these critics and engaging them in a conversation. And he did this for a couple of weeks over time, of why he felt this was important. And at one point, one of my favorite posts was in the middle of this conversation. He created a post just of critical comments. I want you to see what people reading this blog are saying about this. These were not happy people, right? It's hard to imagine. This was not a PR campaign about how great the Humane Society was. These critics were, you're an idiot, right? This is a horrible thing to do. And he posted them there and then gave his rationale, you know, again, and asked for more comments. That process of listening to his community, engaging in the conversation, was one, courageous. He didn't let it just, he didn't make the decision behind a closed door, have it leak out to the press, right? And then he's defending, running backwards in the mainstream media. Oh my gosh, the Humane Society went to visit Michael Vick, which is how it might have happened a few years ago. By opening up and leading this conversation and listening to his community, he built an enormous amount of trust. He did end up engaging Michael Vick. They still do. Ask him to speak on behalf of the organization. In the end, donations and supporters to the organization went up. You want to ask a question?
I want to comment something, because you're talking about his community, or the organization's community, and I think part of the elusiveness of this whole thing is that the definition of community is very random. Because I might hook to your blog once, comment, and go away,
Right.
because I'm angry, okay, because I think that guy was an idiot, okay,
Right.
and then I was just like a comet. I was there and I'm gone,
Right.
but I still have my effect, and it's very hard to have a clear sense of your community because it changes over time. So I realize this is the nature of
Yep.
what we're talking about.
Right.
But the question is, how can I address that, and how can I make that into an advantage rather
Right.
than a disadvantage?
So that is a fantastic question.
I would
Yeah.
like to ask and to add.
If you're going to add more, I'm going to forget the original question.
How do you build a community that will stay with you? That's-
Okay, you can't, right? So the nature, remember the sponge, it's porous. But the nature of networks is that they have an inner core and then they have a periphery. Those core supporters are probably going to stay with you over time unless they get really mad, right? It's the periphery that comes and goes. So networks grow and they shrink, which is fine. They're supposed to. Your job as an organization isn't trying to keep people captive Remember those direct mail donor bases, right? We put people in those donor bases. 60 years later, you're getting letters from this place that you gave a check one time to. But that's definitely not a community. That's a fortress. You can't get in, you can't get out. Let me just finish. And you can't get out. This idea of being porous, of having people come in, engage with you, build relationships with you, when they are so moved to work on your behalf, they will, but they'll also go. It is more fluid, but it's not random. There is a difference, right? You are intentionally having a conversation with people. Your job as an organization is to make the conversation meaningful to a large enough number of people to get your work done. And it might not be the same people over time. And I know that can feel discomforting.
Part of my experience, or part of the materials that I am exposed to, says that actually this kind of world that you're describing is a threat to traditional fundraising. Because you have a lot of people that may donate to you smaller sums.
Right.
And again, more randomly, I would use the word again. I mean, not unpurposefully, but randomly. And part of the whole thing about cultivating a relationship with people is getting lost here.
It is and it isn't. Yes, fundraising is under, traditional fundraising, under attack, right? I worked with a traditional, U.S.-based international advocacy organization last year that has lost 2/3 of its donor base over the last 10 years. Right, those direct mail donor base.
Also the sums, because they become much smaller over the internet.
They're the same amounts as direct mail. They really are. They're the same levels as direct mail. You have an opportunity when they engage with you online to build relationships with people. Back to the being part. And some people will stay, some people will go. Some people in those donor bases only gave once anyway. You never had a relationship with them anyway. It is different. I do understand that. You are just dying to ask something back there? No? Okay. All right, so let me move on, okay? In those networks, remember we had the nodes in the networks, and I said that the nodes are organizations and individuals. Some of the individuals are what we call free agents. Using social media, those people have the capacity to do things on behalf of social change that only organizations could do before. So individuals now can communicate with a wide audience of, wide network of people. They can organize a protest or an effort or an in-person get-together. They can self-organize something. They can raise money. They can advocate. Here's an example. The oil spill in the Gulf Coast of Mexico last year happened. And every day, I don't know if you remember those pictures, right? Just oil pouring into the Gulf. It was really stomach-turning, just awful. The big 8 of environmental groups, I thought, personal opinion, did a terrible job of organizing. What a lot of them did actually was use as an opportunity to fundraise, which I found really appalling. This fella, Andy Lintner, just a geek, did something quite different. He created a map of what the magnitude of the oil spills, because it was so hard to understand if you were watching it on TV or just reading about it in the newspaper and you're hearing cubic yada yadas, that doesn't make any sense to you. What he did, and I put in, just yesterday, I put in Jerusalem, and it shows you, if this was over where you live, this is the size of the oil spill. In 2 weeks, he had 2 million hits on this, and a conversation about this that was so much more real and engaging than anywhere else online. And he just did this, and then he went away. The challenge to organizations is to figure out when and how to work with the Andy Lintners, the free agents of the world, because they're out there and they're smart and they're capable and they want to do things on behalf of causes. But generally what we found is free agents are not interested in institutions. He's not interested in Greenpeace. He's interested in green. Big, big difference. Now you could say as an organization, holy cow, that is so frustrating. we're sitting here, we're doing this work, we've been doing it for 30 years, why can't he just come and play nicely? And he can't play nicely because he's a free agent. By definition, this is what he does. Your job as organizations is to find the free agents in your networks. They're blogging, they're tweeting, they're doing really neat things like this. You have to go out and find them, and you have to build a relationship with them. And sometimes you'll find an area where you can work together. The Red Cross is now working with a free agent named Mark Horvath, who's amazing. And sometimes you don't work with them, but they're in the network. And they're a huge resource if you go out and find them. Social media allows you to create a sense of urgency around an issue. So a year later, here's Greenpeace doing something very interesting online. The oil spill was to Greenpeace what Hurricane Katrina was to the Red Cross, right? Get your ass in gear, basically, right? This is just 2 weeks ago. Greenpeace is upset about the amount of electricity Facebook is using to power all of their servers in Silicon Valley, right? Just a ginormous amount. And the fact that they are not moving to alternative sources of energy when they could be this great example for how to do that. So what Greenpeace did, which I thought was so clever, was they went on Facebook to protest Facebook. In addition, instead of just standing there and doing this, right? How many advocacy groups do this? Don't eat that, don't do that, right? They made a really fun event where they said, we want to set the world record for the largest number of comments on Facebook in 24 hours. I don't know how they knew what the world record was, but they did. And they broke the record. Now what they did, in essence, was 80,000 plus people are now aware of the fact that, you know, Facebook could be using alternative energy and it isn't. And mainstream media picked this up, and Facebook is now having a conversation with Greenpeace about it. Time limited, urgent, very effective. But, and this comes back to the issue that you raised a little while ago about in-house versus, you know, outsourcing. You could outsource a limited campaign like this, but it's not where you want to be in the long run. In the long run, you want to integrate social media into everything that you're doing. You want to take the silos down internally that are keeping communications and development maybe a little bit at odds with one another. One of the huge barriers internally to use of social media are the poor IT people. Any IT people here? I feel so badly for the IT people. Here they are. They signed up to sit in a cold room every day with big boxes and protect the fortresses. That's their job, is to put up the firewalls, right? And to get you out of Word, right? That's what they do. Their job is to put up those big defenses so that the organization doesn't get attacked by viruses. Social media means taking down the walls. Very, very hard for them. You've got to help them to inch out. One way to help them inch out is to actually integrate them in the conversation about social media and the conversations you want to have as an organization so they understand the context better. Yeah.
I think we have a problem in Israel that the organizations want to talk about themselves instead of about their cause.
Mm-hmm. Organizations want to talk about the organization, not the cause writ large.
Yeah.
Right. Me formers.
Major, and that's really major, and it's very difficult to move them from speaking about themselves to speaking about a cause,
sure.
Which is something completely different. And they're not getting there. Any suggestions?
Well, this is kind of what we've been talking about for an hour and a half, in that they need to move to understanding that they're part of a network. Right? They don't do that because they see themselves as standalone organizations, that if they don't talk about themselves, they won't be able to raise money. They won't, you know, I used to read grant proposals, this is a long time ago, and by the end of reading them, you would think, holy cow, we have no more problems. All of these groups have solved all the social problems out there. They're all perfect, right? They've all met all of their goals from last year. This isn't real life. So this is the cultural transition, right? To understanding that continuing to be me-centric is counterproductive for organizations. Now, what we have now that we didn't have 2 years ago are these wonderful stories and case studies, some of which I'm sharing, that can show organizational leaders there's another way to work. And it's going to take some time to make the shift. But chances are, for an organization that is all me, and a fortress, chances are their traditional ways of raising money are becoming very difficult, and this is another way of being...
But it's getting worse. The thing is, the problem is that they don't have much to talk about.
That's because they're not listening.
No, but since they talk about themselves, they don't have so much to speak about. Because they don't, how many things happen in a week anyway,
Right.
So things take time. So what happens is that basically they're all on Facebook, in the wrong place, by the way, on Facebook.
Yep.
Not as pages, but as personal pages many times. And they don't have anything to speak about. I mean, they're mostly silent. Ever so often they, come on and go away. But they can't, they're not, Facebook, for instance, in Israel, it's not doing it for non-profits. They're not, in Israel, they're not being able to, to make it work for them.
Yeah.
Because of this, A, they're not very good in conversations. B, they speak about themselves. And C, they don't have someone to speak about themselves, so they don't.
One of the challenges I've found in life is that I can't actually fix everybody all the time. Although, as my husband will say, I try very hard. Look, let me put it in perspective for you, though. You need to remember how new we all are at doing this. We are at the beginning of using these tools. And what those organizations are going to find over time is the more separate they become from their network, whether they realize it or not, the less relevant they are. The fewer people are listening to their conversation or engaged in their conversation, and it will begin to show up in donations, in organizing, in other ways. And we can try to have an intervention with some of these organizations, but the only way to really begin to make change in organizations, as I said before, is for senior staff to get it. Now, some senior people are saying to me, one difference between this year and years past. When I first started to do this work, 04, 05, that's really ancient times in social media world. The reaction I got from a lot of senior staff, a lot of foundations was, I don't want to do this. Go away. Which I didn't take too personally, but a little personally, right? That it was smaller, more agile, or more desperate organizations that were getting it. This year, coming out with this new book, the reaction is the same one I had from a fellow named Alan at an event in Milwaukee last year, which was at the event, end of the event, he said, look, I'm a CEO of a social service agency, and I get it. I hear you. I know we have to do it. I can't possibly figure out how to put this in my life. Right? My plate is so full with work, with home. I have no place to put it. And I said to him, remember when you started to work? And there was a guy, the guy who was the CEO in the corner office when we still had corner offices, and he refused to use the word processor and was still dictating letters. And you looked at him and you said, I'm never going to be him. I said, you are now him. And this poor fellow started to cry. But I felt really bad because I just wanted to shake him a little bit and not really make him that upset.
Midlife crisis.
Yeah, midlife crisis.
Yeah, he was having a midlife crisis right there. Oh my God. Like a male menopause, right? So, I promise not to say the word again.
Because it's technology, so it's more for men.
Yeah.
Sensitive.
He needed to, first of all, not think of this as another thing on his to-do list. This is the being conversation. You're going to have to look at the world differently, but you have to get intentional about making the time to do this. You've got to put this on your calendar Wednesdays from 8 to 10. You've got to find yourself a mentor who's 22, 23. You're going to buy them food. They're going to slow down and show you how to do this, right? And you're going to have to practice doing it. And we're seeing people do this. Bob Eggers, who's the head of Common Cause of America, in his 70s, a former congressman, is learning Twitter once a week and starting to tweet. Doing that. You can. Everybody can do this. You have to want to do it.
Just,
let me push on to.
Just a small question. I mean, I hate to ask this, but I mean, well, it is the ROI. It's like endless.
Yeah.
We get this all the time.
Can you hold the ROI? Because it's a big conversation. I do want to get back to it, though. I understand that people want to do that. Okay. How long are we going, Felicity? Okay, just want to make sure we get our content. Okay, go ahead.
You're okay, I had a question. Actually, the previous slide that had the 80,000 bolded, and I wanted to know if you could maybe comment a little more about numbers.
This is like the ROI.
Is that where you're going?
So it's the same question as ROI. So let me do it.
Okay.
Fine.
What's ROI?
ROI is return on investment. It's what the business people at your board table are pounding the table. What's the ROI on this? Now, part of the problem here is too many of our boards and organizations have become captive of the business people. Right? Last 15, 20 years, we have all of this business practice coming into NGOs and nonprofits, and we think that's better for some reason. I have never understood why we think that's better. But it is what it is. Again, there's only so much I can change, right? Return on investment is almost always seen through that lens as a financial return. We invested $50,000 and that person's time in social media proved to me that it was worthwhile. We will be very unsuccessful in social media trying to have that conversation out of the gate. Because what we're looking at doing is two things, and we're calling this return on engagement instead of return on investment. We're trying to grow the network, right? We need larger, I am going to use the word communities, larger communities of people who know what we're doing, who are aware of our issues, who can be moved to action at some point. It's a big funnel. Not everybody you touch in the network is going to do something, but some percentage are. So at any point in time, we're always trying to grow the network because we do have people coming and going, which is fine. The second half of that, the return on engagement, is we want to deepen the relationship with people. And the way that we're going to see that online is that a certain percentage of people are going to share your messages. So that's, if you're on Twitter, that's retweeting. If you're on Facebook, it's posting on their own wall to their community. So for instance, if I post something on Facebook and 5 people share it with their communities, right? It wasn't 5 people who saw it. It's 5 times, say, 200. That's 1,000, right? So it's 1,000 people who saw it. So those people who are willing to forward our messages, share them with our own community, people who are willing to post their own or create their own content, like create a YouTube video or blog about what we're doing, that's a huge return on engagement. And then ultimately, people who are going to go from online to on land, which is where social change actually happens. Always has, always will. And I want to show you an example of that. Oh, no, we're using crowds. Here, go one more forward. Yes, I was off by 1. Nice transition, right? This is an organization, Moms Rising. It's about 3 years old. They advocate for fair public policies for working moms. The co-founder of Moms Rising, Joan Blades, is also the co-founder of MoveOn.org. She gets social media in her bones, right? What they do brilliantly, though, is they organize online and then take their campaigns on land. This is their latest Mother's Day effort. They sent out an email. They have an email list of about 3 million people. They have cultivated these emails over time because they really found that their demographic of women in their 40s and 50s primarily used email. So they just went where they were. That's fine.
Are you going to tell the story of how they started that email, that huge email?
With that video?
With the video with the private meeting.
I wasn't going to. Do you want me to? Here, let me just finish this story. They went out with an email and they asked their audience, their moms, to write stories about what it means when they have unpaid leave. How painful, hurtful, destructive it is in their lives to have this. And they asked people to write a paragraph. Can you all see this paragraph from Ruth here? Can you read that? They took these messages, they wrapped them around apples. What could be more wholesome than an apple? And then they had volunteers hand deliver these apples to legislative offices. And then they asked the volunteers who were delivering them, to take pictures and upload them to their Flickr site. So it was this wonderfully imaginative way of engaging their community of folks to do something, to then transition it on land, and then they follow up with their advocates for real legislation after that as well. That's a really interesting example. Can we go back one? I don't want to miss this. Remember when we talked about a way of being, and one of the fun things you could do once you were being a certain way was using crowds? Crowds, large numbers of people, are willing to do things on your behalf when they know about your organization, when they're engaged, but it has to be bite-sized. The mistake that organizations will make is they'll say to people, they'll do two things in error. One, they'll just sort of say to people, kind of, do things yourself, kind of make it up. There's nothing wrong with people being creative, but you got to give them some guidance. You can't just give them a blank slate. The other thing is, they push too hard in crowdsourcing. This is called crowdsourcing, where they're saying to their crowds, do what we want you to do. And it might not be what those people want to do. This was a really interesting experiment by the Royal Opera Company in London. Now, if you could think of what was probably a fortress kind of organization, an opera company, the Royal Opera Company of London certainly might come to mind. What they did was they went out on their Twitter account and they asked their crowd, their network of followers, to help them create a brand new opera. Tweet us your plot lines. And then they took them, with the suggestions they were getting, and they were getting a lot. So they're facilitating this conversation. Oh, so-and-so just mentioned, this should happen next. What do you think? Just like a good party hostess would do. What do you think, Took it to their blog, worked it out on their blog a little bit about what the plot was, ultimately turned the whole plot over to a professional composer, and then premiered the Twitter Opera last September in London. Now, before you think this is the only way they can work now, right? We never want to get into those polar opposites, all online or all on land. It's a bit of both, right? They can do this. They can also perform a full slate of their traditional operas. This doesn't cancel out anything that they would traditionally do. It has engaged for them a whole new audience of people, though. I just thought this was so much fun. And they've continued to work on Twitter in some ways as well. Click, click. Transparency is very hard for organizations. Remember when I was talking about those grant proposals where everything is perfect all the time? Well, that's the opposite of real life. Here's a great example of a museum in Indianapolis that was dying. This museum, very traditional art museum, oil paintings, was fading away. They hired a new CEO a couple of years ago who came in with a very radical suggestion of being very, very transparent. They took their dashboard. A lot of organizations have a management dashboard. The data points you'll use to know, are we on target for fundraising, for volunteers, for whatever it is. This is just a portion of it. They have a lot of data points. Not only did they put the dashboard up online, but you can go online and click on any of these squares, and you see the trend data over time. Now, as a former evaluator, and as professionals you may know, one data point doesn't mean anything. The only thing that's important are the trends, right? Are 20 new members this year good news or bad news? Well, that depends. Was it 50 new members the year before? Was it 0 new members the year before? Right? The context of that changes whether that's good news or bad news. They put everything up online. They don't window dress anything here. And when they first put it up for a good couple of months, it was right in the heart of the recession. Their fundraising was going down and going down. And what they did was they take some of these data points and they're blogging about them and talking about what might be hard, why it's so expensive to run the museum and keep the humidity at a certain level, why that's so important. And they show pictures of the artwork and link to other articles about keeping humidity at a certain level. This has been quite brilliant. It's not the only thing they've done. They've done a whole bunch of things, but collectively, All of things together has significantly increased their membership and their fundraising. Being this transparent is not at odds with being successful, even on a financial return on investment. It is very, very good in a networked world to be open this way. I want to show you, I want to really walk through this, and then we'll take more questions, okay? Remember before when I said on the Greenpeace campaign, it was a brilliant time-limited campaign. But that's not just what we want to do. We want to integrate social media into everything that we're doing. An organization that does this quite brilliantly is Charity Water. Anybody heard of Charity Water? You're nodding, right? You all should go and look at their website. It's very, very impressive. Scott Harrison started Charity Water, again, about 3 years ago. They fund clean water projects in developing countries. That's all they do. Even though they've been pushed by some funders to expand what they do, Scott has always been clear about this is who we are, and he lives by the axiom of do what you do best and network the rest. What they've done that's so brilliant, if you go to the website, you'll say, oh, your impression might be, they use social media really a lot, in a lot of different phases. It's more than they use it a lot. It's how well they're using it. Because what they've done is they have understood the experience of people in their network being part of Charity Water from the outside in. And most of us try to share our experience from the inside out. Right? What is it that we do? And we want to push it out and engage people, and then we get frustrated if they don't want to engage. What Scott's done, and his team, is to say, if we were you and on the outside looking in, the first thing that I want is a very quick, clear video about what's your story. Put anybody here, remember we talked about simplicity at the very beginning? Can you do a 30-second video that tells me what your story is? Who are you? Why are you important? What do you do? 30 seconds, right? What's your story? Then, they have their own social network on their site that gives people a variety of ways of participating here. Remember I said it's a big funnel. Some people will be lightly touched and maybe just want to share this, press like on Facebook. Other people want to engage more deeply. So for instance, Scott has 1 million plus, might be even 1.5 million people on his own, on his Twitter account. 1.5 million people aren't going to come and do this. 70,000 people are on the website and do this, right? This is their core of people who will share, raise money, organize events, right? That's what these folks are doing. Then when they're doing this and they're funding these clean water projects, they can actually see them, right? So you've gone through this entire experience, awareness, education, activity, completing a project and reflecting about it, and then you can continue to do that. Yeah.
Isn't he fundraising not from people themselves, but from organizations like Levi's or Pepsi or something like that want to connect with him because of all the people who are following him? Isn't the organization fundraising not from the people themselves, but from organizations and companies that want to contribute to them because of all these people that are following them?
I'm not aware of that part. It might be possible. What I'm aware of are a whole lot of small dollar donors.
I think Levi's is funding them, and some very big companies that want to identify themselves with.
Well, every organization has corporate or private foundation funding. I don't think that's any different.
Yeah, but aren't the companies, don't they want to identify with them because of because they have so many people following them?
But that's a wonderful thing.
It's corporate philanthropy. Corporate philanthropy is changing significantly.
Like
what used to be, so corporations used to have foundations attached to them or even separate from them that provided grants. More and more common over the last 2-3 years are corporations using marketing dollars for philanthropy. It wouldn't surprise me if they have that. They're very transparent about what they do. You can go online and look at them. So, you want to click one more time? What else do we have? Yeah, one more. Okay, some resources. So there we go. How are we doing? Everybody still breathing? I have been blocking you the whole time. Did you see anything at all? Okay, good. Okay, let's go. Who's got something?
I just wanted to ask you, what is your vision for the social environment or the social world in 15 years, in 10 years? How is it going to look in, if we look at it 10 years, 15 years, how is it going to look?
So